afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to introduce the fourth panel of the day. It's on energy security. We'd like to welcome our panelists who are from a wide variety of countries. So we have Dr. Tatiana Mitrova, who's the head of oil and gas at the Energy Research Institute of the Russian Academy of Sciences. David Buchan, senior research fellow at the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies. Vladimir Drebentsov, VP for BP Russia. Andrew Risk, senior associate at GPW, who replaces Philip Wormwood. His wife is giving birth as we speak, so we wish them the best. And Gulmira sends her apologies for not being able to make it. I'm going to hand over to our moderator, Raju Patel, who's the Chief Executive of Specialist Oil and Gas Consultancy, Fulcrium. Take it.
Okay, thank you. So, Europe is heavily reliant on gas from Russia. At least a quarter of Europe's gas consumption actually comes from Russia. And half of that flows through the Ukrainian transit pipelines. And to give it a bit more context, Germany, which is Europe's most powerful economy, or EU's most powerful economy, imports about 30% of its gas requirements from Russia, while Russia's former Soviet bloc neighbors, such as Estonia, Latvia, Slovakia, and Estonia, are completely reliant on Russian gas. Finland is also completely reliant on Russian gas. Luckily, in the UK, we are not as dependent, but as the events that have unfolded in Ukraine tell us, and what we can see, European energy security has now been catapulted back to the top of the foreign policy agendas in Europe. So today, the panel is going to discuss European energy security from the perspective of geopolitics and economics. So those are the two dimensions that we're going to cover today. And what I'm hoping for today is a lively debate, critical and challenging and highly interactive. So as we go along, if you feel that you want to ask a question or you want to make some comments, please put your hand up and I'll do my best to bring you in. So the intention is to have a very lively debate and to challenge the panelists. I've spoken to them. They said that they'll say anything. So they're not limited to what they can say. So I'm hoping to make this a really lively debate. Thank you. So what I'll do first is I'll ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, give us 3 minutes or so, telling us something about who they are, their affiliation, their professional background, and also what they did for their summer holidays that have just gone. Okay, so can we start with Andrew?
Thank you. Good afternoon. So my name is Andrew Risk. I work for GPW. It's a business intelligence and political risk firm. I specialize in the former Soviet Union. So my background is, Russian and Spanish university, and then several years living in Moscow working in the investment banking sector. I managed to arrive just at the time when the subprime crisis started and managed to see the collapse, the fall, and now the stagnation. So I thought I saw about 5 different cycles in 5 years. Now, in my role at GPW, we work with more the foreign direct investment sector. So we work with major oil companies and investors across lots of different sectors who are looking to enter the CIS, either for the first time or perhaps expand their operations. We call ourselves political risk, but it's more looking at the lower level, looking at your counterparties and what their exposure is to a vast array of different things. I think my role today really is to try and sort of give our take on where we stand currently in the Ukrainian situation, what's happening in Russia, and maybe I might touch on the broader Central Asia situation, because there is a wider effect. It's a pretty bleak picture, let's be honest here. And I think for our take on it, one of the overriding factors that we're looking now at is the winter. And this, I think, is a really key factor that's going to undermine any attempts really to stabilize the situation. Having lived in Russia for so long, I try and find the positives in most things, but for Ukraine, it's a harder battle. I could say, if we look economically, the slowdown is, well, slowdown, that's not fair. Contraction is enormous, and quite frankly, from Russia's position, they're really very hard for them to back out from where they are right now. So I think that these factors will all be accentuated as the winter takes its toll. I think a really important factor to look at is the Ukrainian government doesn't have a government. They have a parliament but no government. And this is going to make it extremely difficult to make some decisions going forward. That is essentially our base take. With regards to my summer holiday, please don't judge me, but I was cycling down the coast of Albania. I highly recommend it. It's an interesting take into the different economic levels and drivers in Europe. If you start in the north, you're next to Montenegro, which uses the euro but doesn't have the euro, isn't allowed it. And in the south, you have the Greek border. And if you ever want an example of capital flight, look at the number of Greek mansions in the south of Albania. I think I'll sum up for that.
Okay, good. Okay, Tatiana Mitrova.
Yeah, I'm an economist. I have nothing to do with the political science, and therefore I'm always preferring to look at the economic rationale rather than on the emotions and political ambitions, though of course I have to admit that they play a huge role in all energy interrelations, especially in the last several years or maybe decades. I'm working in the Energy Research Institute of the Russian Academy of Sciences, which was founded like 30 years ago to develop energy program of the Soviet Union by that time. And actually, until now, we are responsible for long-term strategic forecasting for the energy strategies. There were several energy strategies of the Russian Federation. I am in particular responsible for the global picture. So we are modeling global energy markets, and I'm also responsible for the domestic oil and gas, which means like everything. Right now, we are submitting the next version of the Russian energy strategy to the government. I'm not sure whether many of our proposals will be approved, but at least we are doing our best to try to move the situation. And I'm also, I started my career in academia from analysis of the global gas markets evolution. So I am still gas markets, it's something very, very interesting and particularly important for me. So, of course, I am following quite closely all these developments of EU-Russia-Ukrainian gas relationship. And I agree with Andrew that so far the situation doesn't look inspiring. Though, again, as an economist, I still see a lot of rationale for this cooperation. For all sides, and I hope that this rationality will be stronger than other reasons. And well, concerning my summer holidays, I was traveling with my kids in southern France, and I really enjoyed it.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, Vladimir Drebentsov.
It's already been said that I'm vice president of BP Russia, but actually I share my time between BP Russia and BP POC. And for BP POC, I'm sort of head of Russia and CIS economics, responsible for economic and energy policy analysis and advice in the countries of former Soviet Union. where the company has any interest. So I've been working with BP for the last almost 9 years, and before that I had spent 13 years with the World Bank doing pretty much the same, which is advising countries in the former Soviet Union on macroeconomic reform and structural reforms. Also, as part of BP Group Economics, I'm a member of the team which produces BP Statistical Review of World Energy and BP Global Energy Outlook. Actually, at the moment, we are working on the next issue, which we will release in February next year. So, this functional responsibility gives me an opportunity to look at global gas markets, because I'm responsible in BP Statistical Review for global gas reserves and global gas trade. And I'm also a member of EU-Russia Energy Dialogue thematic group on strategy and scenarios and EU-Russia Gas Advisory Council. So I'm together with Tatiana, I'm involved in a lot of discussions which might been discussed again today, because they deal with what is perceived as energy security issue here in Europe. And summer holidays, well, given that I have a pretty busy travel schedule, I had to take it in pieces. So the first piece was actually here, not here, it was in Scotland on the eve of the referendum, and you tell me why. And the second week of my leave, I spent in Alsace, traveling around a lot of small but very nice wineries.
Nice. Thank you. Yeah. David Buchan?
Raju, thank you. I am a retired journalist after about 35 years with The Economist and Financial Times in this country and abroad, a couple of postings in Washington, a couple of postings in Brussels and Paris. I've also covered the somewhat of relevance in a way to today's discussion, the Eastern Europe in the Soviet period, the Soviet bloc, and also defense and diplomatic editor. For the last 7 years, I've been at the Oxford Institute of Energy Studies, where I'm really a regional specialist focusing on the EU. I've written about 3 books on the EU, one on energy and one on EU and energy. So that's my focus. As to summer holidays, my wife and I decided, because I'd edited a magazine for the World Petroleum Congress, which took place in Moscow in June of this year, to go back to Moscow, where we hadn't been for some time, and that was very nice. The weather was freezing. It was actually a cure. It was just before. There were quite interesting, because there were quite a lot of Western oil and gas men there. And that was partly because it was a world event. It wasn't a Russian event. It wasn't like the St. Petersburg Forum. So for instance, Rex Tillerson of Exxon, which is a company which is now scaling down its operations, he was prominently there because it was a world event, not a Russian event. And it was also, of course, in June, was before the latest the sort of second round of technology sanctions were imposed. So it was a sort of rather benign. It was a less fraught period than a less tense period than now. I mean, that's it.
Okay, great. Thank you, David. So perhaps if we can start the questions with Andrew Risk. And Andrew, if I can ask you for more of a contextual perspective, what is the state of play now with Russia and Ukraine? It seems we have reached a potential stalemate militarily. What are the economic, security, and political prospects for the next 6 to 12 months? And where does this end? Andrew.
Thank you. Well, 6 to 12 months in this climate is quite a big ask, unfortunately, but I will do my best. Just to sort of follow on from what I said initially, I suspect it's right into one of the lines, economics, military. So on the military situation, security, as I'm sure you're all aware, there are more accusations against Russia of sending troops and supplies over the border. I'm particularly concerned by, I think it's Latvia's announcement that they will help the Ukrainians militarily. I think that's it's very unhelpful, well, I don't want to say unhelpful, but unsettling step in terms of the direction we're going. I think a very, very big issue that's perhaps not discussed very much in the West is the position where Mr. Poroshenko, Ukraine's president, he is in this very difficult position now whereby his troops are on the front line, but not in full combat. And it's questionable whether he can actually keep them there, if he can financially support those troops throughout the winter, clothe, heat, and feed them. Alternatively, if he pulls them off the front line, then you're almost accepting defeat, which I don't believe that he's politically strong and stable enough to be able to do that, as I said, without a government in place. Sort of to sum up, really, or to on that front, the security situation is very very bleak at the moment. Economically, as I mentioned, obviously the Russia situation is the ruble. I think the West tends to overlook that Russia actually posted growth in the third quarter in terms of GDP. I think it was. I mean, it's not of the level that an emerging market would want, but it's still growth, and so that has to be accepted. And there will be some other positives that come from that. Ukraine, on the other hand, I have little. There's little really to look optimistically at. With regards to the broader political setup, I think the next 6 to 12 months, perhaps, I guess, what I would probably think will come out is a greater realization, which we're only seeing, I think, in the last couple of weeks, is that Russia's supposed turn to the east is going to be far more complicated than was initially laid out. Quite frankly, the Chinese are in an excellent position with regards to its position lending to Russian companies, lending to the Russian government. We have seen, for example, this gas deal between Russia and China. Now, I think there's two parts to that. One is that I think it's a fantastic step forward for the Russians in the sense that after so many years of negotiations, they've now taken the first step, and then they can build from this. It won't be smooth, and I won't think it'll be quick, but it does at least set the ball rolling. The alternative, and the sort of nearer term prospects, is that, as we are seeing, the Chinese banks and so forth are not going to step in where the Western banks have left. Well, they may fill some of the gap, but if they do, as is commercially sensible, they won't offer exactly easy rates. So what I feel, I think, essentially overall is that the situation it seems inevitable that it will have to deteriorate before it gets better. But ultimately, there are a few sort of positives in the very, very longer term coming out, such as China and Russia talking to each other a lot more.
Okay. Do we have any reactions, comments from the panel? No? Okay, good. All right, so I'll now turn to David Buchan. David, what is the fuss with gas? Why is gas such an important part of Europe's energy mix, and can we live without it?
Oh, right.
So,
well,
all this Ukraine transit pipelines and, all starting off with gas. Why is gas the big issue?
Well, before turning it to two real gas experts, Vladimir and Tatiana, well, perhaps I can just say a few sort of contextual remarks. Well, gas, I mean, obviously by the nature of gas, it's difficult to transport. Pipeline gas locks you into a relationship, very fixed, obviously fixed relationship with your supplier. So it has, because it needs to be, the alternative is LNG, of course, which is more flexible. So, I mean, as everyone knows, that there isn't the same problem with oil and coal because they are more easily transportable, they're more easily storable, and then I suppose and electricity doesn't really count because electricity is largely consumed in the country that it's generated in. So this the question of why gas? Well, before coming to the point about where its place in the energy mix, this question of the security implications of European dependence on Russian gas is an old story. One landmark was 30 years ago when Ronald Reagan, President Reagan, tried to stop the West Europeans selling technology which would have increased the supply of gas from Siberia to Western Europe. The West Europeans, including Mrs. Thatcher, including his beloved Mrs. Thatcher, paid no attention whatsoever. They reckoned that the Soviet Union proved a good supplier for the previous 10 years or so, and it was cheap and it was a good deal. Fast forward a bit, 25 years, and we come to the entrance into the EU of the Central and East Europeans, the former communist allies of Russia, who came into a European Union which frankly paid little attention to their energy security concerns, either in terms of having a resilient gas market that could be used as to alternative supplies. I mean, it really wasn't a proper market, and also the legislation, the European legislation, was pretty hopeless. Now, again, fast forward to this year, after some really minor gas crises, well, perhaps increasing in magnitude, 2006, short interruption, 2009, more major interruption of Russian supplies through Ukraine to the European Union. There was a serious interruption there. Now, in those two crises, frankly, the European Union was a bystander. It was really just a quarrel between Russia and Ukraine about payment terms. Two countries that have, got on badly and got on steadily more badly since the dissolution of the Soviet Union. But with the annexation of Crimea and the invasion of eastern Ukraine, basically Europe, the European Union, has become a sort of a principal actor in this, no longer a bystander, because of the need to to come up with some foreign policy political response to the Russian acts in Ukraine. So I would say, so now European energy security is taken pretty seriously. The West Europeans now sort of accept the Central and East Europeans' concerns about this. More has been done inside the European energy market to make it more resilient to external shocks with interconnectors. Still a lot of work to be done. The legislation about emergency sharing arrangements is much better than it was. But there's still, so there's no longer, I would see, a Western and Eastern European, no longer an East-West divide inside the EU about Russia. There's a fairly solid response. But what there is, and I'll just end on this, that I detect a strange sort of division in European opinion between the energy professionals and the sort of the political establishment. Because Russia hasn't used the energy weapon, which Ronald Reagan a long time ago worried about, and many people still do. We're, in the West, we're the people who are actually using the energy weapon in a way because we're putting sanctions on oil. And so the energy community, the energy professionals say, what's all this concern about, okay, Ukraine's got a energy problem with Russia, but we don't. They're basically supplying, being a good and reliable supplier. But all the political establishments of European governments and everyone in the sort of political military area are basically not only wanting a much firmer response, but going around saying, oh, Russia's already using the energy weapon. They're sort of completely exaggerating. So I see a sort of, it's a strange situation where we have Russia still reliable supplier to Europe through Ukraine, Russia an undoubted, in my view, aggressor and an annexer of Crimea. And different parts of the European establishment, whether you deal with energy or politics, come to very different conclusions from those two facts.
Okay, David, so, I asked, what's the fuss with gas? And
oh, sorry, I've got the question, yes. Well, sorry, so let me just very quickly say that, okay, because turn it over to people who know more than I do. I would just say looking at the EU point of view, gas is not, there's no gas strategy in Europe. It is basically the policymakers in Brussels tend to regard it, they admit it's the cleanest of fossil fuels, but they don't really positively want to promote it. They tend to, they have pursued policies which through neglect or basically neglect have actually hurt gas. And one of the, so it's a gas demand and details to be supplied by others, but gas demand in Europe is basically flat or falling. I personally think from a climate change point of view, in fact, the EU should develop a more positive strategy for gas. They should do something to redress they should promote it in transport as a transition fuel to a low-carbon economy. And they should also do something to redress the price advantage which coal has over gas.
Okay.
There we are.
Good. Tatiana, do you have a response? What's the fuss with gas? Also, David said that pipelines tend to, intimately tie parties in. But as we see with Hungary looking to buy Russian-financed nuclear reactors and nuclear fuel, so there's a parallel discussion for nuclear. But for now, what's the fuss with gas?
Mm-hmm. Well, in early 2000, people were talking about gas as a transitional fuel. There was even such a logo, fuel of choice. Probably you remember. And it was extremely popular, and all the forecasts of gas demand were very high. In Europe, it was like 2.5% per annum up to 2030. So yes. Gas had really bright future, but then it has lost its reputation. So it's an amazing story for the energy balance, when yes. Actually the perception has changed attitude to the fuel, and then when it became also much more expensive as oil prices were rising up, the price for gas also rose in 2008, 2009. This reputation was completely destroyed. It became also commercially unattractive. So, but initially I think it was 2006 when there was a lot of mess and a lot of worries about sustainability and security of gas supplies. and it was very broadly discussed in the media. So I think that for gas, though in fact in 2006 disruption was absolutely minor, especially if you compare it. For me, you know, it's very striking that, do you know a lot about energy security catastrophe with North African gas coming to Europe? How many people know that Algeria has nearly halved its gas supply to Europe recently? Do you know how long Libya is not supplying gas to Europe? But it's not written in the media. Yeah? People are not discussing whether North Africa can be regarded as a reliable gas supplier, or whether Egypt, for example, which has just destroyed all LNG contracts, can be regarded as a reliable supplier. It's just Russian story. Though, you know, with Russia, you see, initially all this gas supply system, it was built in the Soviet time, 1970s, mainly, and it was a single country. There was no Russia and Ukraine. It was just one Soviet Union, and therefore nobody cared about the routes. These were optimal, shortest routes to bring gas to Europe. But when Soviet Union collapsed and Ukraine became an independent country, then all the problems started. How actually to arrange this transit in a sustainable way? It took 20 years, 25, and we failed. I mean, there were many approaches, there were many attempts, bilateral, multilateral, including EU, trying to find any sustainable system, any guaranteed system of this transit, how it can work, so that nobody worries and there are no conflicts arising each year. We didn't find such a solution. So, of course, there were a lot of political context around it, but the problem is that even on the purely commercial, economic side, this solution wasn't found, because Ukraine, actually, as most of the former Soviet republics, is extremely energy intensive, and it cannot afford paying for gas European price, and actually that was the matter of negotiations, how to provide Ukraine with lower priced gas, but at the same time how to provide reliable transit. It didn't work. So all the disruptions of Russian gas supplies to Europe, which we can remember, actually two of them, 2006 and then 2009, 2010, these were not like Russia blackmailing EU, if you do not do something, we will switch off the gas. Never. It was Russia cannot agree with Ukraine on the conditions of transit, and we have this mess, and finally we just stop supplies. Europe is a victim, definitely, but it was not intended directly to hurt European consumers. The problem is that actually energy security, it's an externality. So everybody wants to have it and nobody is ready to pay for it. So the question is, what can Europe do now with gas supplies, especially as gas is still playing an important role in the European fuel mix? And it is possible theoretically to replace it, to diminish this role, but it will take decades, several decades, even with all the renewables development, even with all the energy efficiency, still Europe cannot rely in the visible future only on solar and wind. I think it doesn't want to rely on coal, and it definitely, it's very cautious concerning nuclear. So what is left? Sorry. Anyway, you should have some gas in the fuel mix, and it is extremely difficult to replace Russian gas, because by the end of the day, it's one of the most competitive sources of supplies. And actually, we made an interesting study recently with the Brookings Institute in Washington, which can hardly be suspected in some sympathy towards Russia. Yeah, so you would better expect that they will criticize this dependence and try to call Europe for reducing dependence on Russia, but we made actually a clearly modeling exercise trying to find through all the scenarios, including a lot of US LNG coming to Europe or complete termination of the Russian long-term contract. So, we've tried many different options. But by the end of the day, if you are looking from the economic rationale, it's like optimization model, optimizing and looking for the lowest costs, supply costs. Actually, the range of Russian gas supplies to Europe varies from 110 to 150 BCM. That's it. That's the cost of the question. So actually, there are not so many options. Yeah, you can bring Russian gas below that level, but then the prices in Europe are like doubling. Whether Europe is ready to pay this price for the energy security, which is actually like a perception. So there are no real threats at the moment, but everything can happen. It's better to reduce.
So are you saying that alternatives to Russian gas are at least twice the cost?
No, I'm saying that Europe has to increase imports anyway because the indigenous production is falling, right? So there will be more and more gas coming to Europe from all over the world. And definitely there will be diversification of these supply sources, and it's necessary to do. I completely agree with the European authorities. But doing this, you can hardly reduce absolute volumes of Russian gas supplies. So the share will definitely decline, but the absolute volumes, it's very difficult to replace them because then you will need much more gas coming from more remote places, more expensive locations, and it will be really very difficult to do. And more importantly, the question is whether it is really necessary to do it, whether this threat is realistic or it's more like expectation. Look, just last remark, just look at the spot prices during all this mess with Ukraine. They were going down. All summer they were going down. The market is just ignoring it. The market is not actually taking seriously this threat of interruption of supplies.
Okay, so the market is seeing that there are alternatives.
The market is seeing that these threats of supply disruption are not serious.
Okay. Okay, so what you're saying is gas is here to stay.
Exactly, and Russian gas is here to stay.
Gas is here
or
to stay.
Alternatively, you will have to pay much more for any other if you wish to significantly reduce Russian gas volumes, then gas will become much more expensive.
Okay, thank you, Tatiana. So, Vladimir?
Well, I just wanted to add that about threat perception, two things. One about threat perception. Well, the threat hasn't materialized, but, that's why people take out insurance, against these risks taking place. And I suppose if, certain, particularly Central East European countries want to pay 50% more, I think, or a third more for LNG gas from Qatar in the case of Poland, I think, then I suppose they're entitled to, but they may be a little bit silly and short-sighted, but anyway, that's their option. Just on the question of this, you said diversification away from Russian gas. I just wanted to sort of agree with you and underline the point that as the gas demand is flat, most European countries are contractually committed to taking minimum portions of Gazprom Russian gas. It's hard to diversify away from Russian gas, which you could do in an expanding market. You could say, any new gas, any extra gas demand will be met from non-Russian sources. I mean, that might be crazy, but it might be possible to do. But as the gas demand is flat, and on the supply side, we're strongly committed to quite a large volume of Gazprom gas, I just want to underline what you say. The diversification is certainly on the agenda, but it is difficult.
I would also add a little bit to that. You see, first of all, these Gazprom's contracts, they are expiring, and most likely, if the political situation will remain the same, they will be not prolonged or at least part of them will be not prolonged. But then, you see, each year Europe actually needs more imports. Yeah, so potentially new suppliers, if they come, they could.
With flat demand, with indigenous production going down, coal and imports keeps
the
growing.
problem is, to my mind, that actually there is not so much gas available globally at the moment. Probably when we are looking at the supply-demand balance, by the end of this decade, the situation will change with a lot of LNG coming on stream. But for example, 2014, 2015, 2016, there are not so many options on the table.
Okay, so we've talked about, we're talking about energy diversification, we're talking about alternative sources to Russian gas, we talked about LNG, and then we've touched on, pipelines. So Vladimir, if I can first ask you about LNG. Is it a credible alternative for Europe as a diversification strategy? And is it going to be meaningful enough for the EU?
Oh, thank you, Raju. But let me start answering your question from a little bit afar. First of all, I would say, with respect to your question, what's all this fuss about gas? I think actually Europe does not yet realize that even more fuss expected on gas markets in the future. Because so far, Ukraine, which after all consumes over 50 BCMA of gas, has been Russia's headache. Russia has been subsidizing this consumption. But from now on, it's pretty clear that Russia will not be doing that. So Ukraine will increasingly become part of European gas market. And actually, Europe will have to handle this problem. And given sort of financial stance in that country, it's not likely to be an easy problem. But anyway, so turning to energy security agenda and answering the question why gas is considered part of this agenda, I agree with David that there are some objective reasons for that. Gas market is different from other energy markets. And that's exactly, I think, why people in Europe are concerned about Russian gas. Because when I try to think whether it's more gas market or Russia, which makes people concerned, I think it's more about market than about Russia. Why? Let me give you just a simple example. Raju mentioned that Europe depends on Russian gas for 25% of its consumption. But if we look at oil or coal, around 30% of European imports are also from Russia. But I don't recall reading any headline in any newspaper that sort of imports of Russian coal or Russian oil presents a threat to Europe's energy security. And why? I mean, it's still the same Russia. It can stop flowing gas, as people are concerned about. It can stop flowing oil or coal. And in this particular country, actually, I recall that in 1 year we checked, and 44% of coal burnt in power generation in the UK was from Russia. And just imagine what would happen if Russia stopped flowing this coal. But again, nobody cared about that at all. Why? Exactly because coal and oil are deep markets with flexible supply. And gas market, I agree with David, is so far a different one. And here comes LNG. LNG is exactly a medium which has potential to change this market, to make gas market much more similar to coal and oil markets, because Europe will have will feel more security just because it will be able to import gas from other places than North Africa. And I agree with Tatiana that people in Europe usually underestimate sort of problems in North Africa as a gas supplier to Europe. Looking at other pipeline alternatives, Caspian, Middle East, again, volumes one can see there are pretty small, so in any case not comparable to Russian volumes. But basically, if Europe feels that if need be, might import LNG, even at higher price, then it will feel secure. And actually, I think that then Russia will benefit, because the more secure Europe feels about gas, the less concerned it will be about Russian gas. So basically, Russian gas will be treated or perceived the same way as Russian oil or Russian coal. So that's why I actually think that LNG development in Europe should help. But it sounds a little bit as a contradiction, because if you look at existing regasification capacity in Europe, it's utilized only at around 20%. So Europe already has potential to import a lot of LNG, but somehow doesn't feel secure. And here I agree with Tatiana. The problem is that global gas market is pretty tight at the moment, and is likely to remain tight for the next 2-3 years. But after that, actually, we expect a lot of new projects coming on stream. So basically, over the next 20 years, we expect LNG supply to double again. It doubled over the last 15 years, and it is likely to double again over the next 20. And that's exactly the time when our gas market might not yet become a global one, but it will become much more integrated. And various sort of corners of that market, including Europe, will feel much safer about prospects for importing gas from alternative sources. That's why I think that LNG is key to solving energy security issues as they are perceived at the moment in Europe.
Okay, so just following on from that, so up until, is it 2012, Lithuania was completely reliant on Russian gas. And then we've got the floating offshore import terminal that I'm not sure is fully operational yet. But
it's been commissioned.
It's been commissioned, and that triggered a 26, if I know correctly, a 26% price drop in the contract between Gazprom and Lithuania. So LNG is a credible strategic alternative.
It is.
Often expensive, though. I think Lithuania is getting gas from Statoil, which has more or less said it would match the Gazprom price. But I believe Poland, for instance, which is it LNG terminal? I think it's in operation now, isn't it, on the Baltic coast? They have a contract with Qatar, and I believe that's about a third more expensive.
Well, at the moment, again, because the global market, LNG market is tight, for two reasons. First, we sort of feel sort of an investment pause, which was with us post 2008. Again, before the crisis, we had LNG glut, because a lot of projects coming on stream at the same time, and actually at the time of the global financial crisis. But what happened then? Given that the LNG industry is as cyclical as oil industry, there was not enough investment in that year. So we currently live in this sort of LNG pause. But come 2017, we see sort of the next wave of LNG hitting the market. So basically, LNG will become more available and hence likely less expensive, because at the moment, if Europe, for instance, needs to import LNG to replace Russian gas, it would have to compete with Japan. And until recently, prices in Japan, particularly post-Fukushima, were pretty high. But at the moment, as we know, Japan restarts its nuclear reactors, LNG demand in Japan goes down, oil price goes down, and LNG contracts in Asia are oil-linked. So, we basically see Asian LNG prices going down, which again reduces energy security risk in Europe, because it makes sort of LNG more affordable already now, even with the tight global market. But again, a lot of, I agree with Tatiana, a lot of these problems are perceptional. There is still a lot of politics. So on top of these objective reasons, which basically makes Russia the best attractive source of gas in Europe, it's not perceived this way. But and it's at least partial. It's not partial. It is sort of as much Russia's fault as consumers' fault. But basically, looking forward and given sort of Russia's dependence on European gas markets, I do see potential for sort of continuation of mutually beneficial relations. It's one thing that Europe relies on Russian gas for 20% of consumption. Another thing is that Gazprom relies on Europe for 60% of its revenue. So I mean, do you think Gazprom wants to lose European market? I don't think so.
Okay.
There's a question.
Yes. Yes.
Maybe we open up questions from the floor.
Yes. Do we have questions?
Yeah. It's just there.
Tomasz Dynfax. Vladimir, I was interested in your comment about the future of LNG. It strikes me that, well, it seems that the Russian LNG is suffering problems at the moment, not just with finance, but contractors are nervous about supplies for future projects. Therefore, we're seeing something of a potential possible renaissance in pipelines to Gazprom. What role do you think Russia could therefore play in a future deeper LNG market?
Well, as an economist, it might be, I mean, my economic bias, but I think commercial considerations will matter most. And we do see potential for Russia's share of global LNG market going up, probably to 10%, but a lot will depend on competition between Australian LNG, American LNG, Russian LNG. And again, sort of prospects of each individual project will be decided by this interplay of commercial considerations. At the moment, some Russian LNG projects look commercially attractive, some are less commercially attractive. But basically, we see that competing gas, for instance, Australian gas, is also at the moment very expensive. But again, what all economists know is that when there is competition on the market, I mean, sort of the situation might change. And actually, we've heard earlier today, at least those who attended oil and gas panel, that I mean, cost of producing oil sort of follows oil price. That's what we, economists at BP, proved empirically. We just ran a causality test. It's not price of oil which follows cost. It's vice versa. So with LNG, we might see the same picture. So if there is competition and low LNG price, cost might go down. And again, what will matter is ability of each company to increase efficiency of these projects to be able to compete at lower prices. And that's why, I mean, some Russian projects might be challenged.
Okay.
Thank you. Andrzej Rosewski, PKN Orlen. Just one thing to clarify, the Świnoujście terminal in Poland will be online half next year, I think. Now it's going through technical test. My question is related to the cooperation and your view on cooperation between the European Union countries as a buyer of energy from Russia. There was this idea of union on cooperation on energy buying proposed by former Polish Prime Minister, Mr. Donald Tusk, and I'd like to know your opinion about this idea. And to add to this, I'd like to also have some comments regarding that probably Europe itself doesn't help to solve the situation, because if you look at the status of and behavior of separate countries, the long-term agreements with Gazprom, for example, and the vested interest, probably there is also something to be done here, because, for example, interconnections between the countries are not working well or not developed to the level they should be developed. So there is a question about the flows, internal flow in the between European Union countries, whether it's possible to transfer gas, for example, from this kind of terminals as we are discussing here. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so the proposal on the Polish European Union
Yes.
energy union?
Well, that was the one concrete proposal that Donald Tusk, the Polish Prime Minister, well, now President of the European Council from next week, attached to his idea, his plan for an energy union. Well, most people, a number of people in the Commission, European Commission itself, almost the entire European gas industry thinks, and traders and exchanges thinks this is crazy, because it would completely distort the market. There are some, it'd be a buyer's cartel. It would have to be, it couldn't be made compulsory. Politically, that would be madness. It would have to be voluntary. Which are the countries that would volunteer for this? Almost certainly the countries that are still 100% dependent for their gas supply on Russia. Well, you could have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these countries all banding together, but probably, and I would defer to Tatiana and Vladimir on this, but I doubt very much that Gazprom would give them a discount, because I guess this is what we're talking about, getting banding together to small countries, banding together to get a better price for Russian gas. Well, I think it's most unlikely Gazprom would give a discount because these countries have no alternative. The Russians seem to be, what I know of it, very hard-headed. If you have alternative supplies, if you have, within your territory or nearby, a liquid gas hub, a trading center, with alternative supplies, Gazprom will certainly match give you a discount on your long-term contract. But so I think it's unlikely. However, there is some political emotion and momentum behind this, and there are now two new, to confuse things, European commissioners in Brussels. One responsible for Energy Union, the other the Energy and Climate Change Commissioner. They have both mentioned that they would study further this idea of collective purchasing. I think this Energy Union label, the Energy Union plan, will leave this aside because I think it's simply too difficult and too much in conflict with long-time efforts to create a competitive gas market. And I think they will focus on existing policies, try and give a bit of a push to regional. At the moment, emergency gas sharing plans are just done, individual country by individual country. I think there will be an effort to, and it would make sense, to have regional sharing arrangements. There'll be more push. You mentioned interconnectors. I think there's the private-public finance initiative launched by the Commission yesterday. I think some of this money, if it will be directed towards interconnection, and so I think that's the way that this Energy Union plan, that's the way it will go.
Okay. Yeah, I'm conscious of the...
Yeah, I agree. Oh, yes, if I may.
Yes.
I agree. Physical interconnection in Europe is a problem, but it's recognized by the European Commission. Actually, a lot has been already done. A lot will be done. For instance, Trans-Adriatic pipeline will have an interconnector into Bulgaria. I would say actually that in the northern part of Eastern Europe, this problem has already been, mostly solved. So the main problem area is still southeastern Europe, and EC is quite aware of that, and money, I agree, will be invested into increasing interconnection. And I agree that this will reduce Gazprom monopoly power, but actually, again, it's even difficult to sue Gazprom in such markets because of a concept of sort of maximum attained value. So if alternatives are not available, I mean, Gazprom is free to charge this price. I mean, it's legitimate. So, but the situation with sort of more liquid and interconnected market changes. For instance, our calculation shows, and not just ours, that Gazprom has already been selling gas at almost spot prices in Germany because of a difference on gas market. And so I think that's the concept which will spread over the whole of Europe.
Okay.
Actually,
yes, Tatiana.
I wanted to add a little bit to what Vladimir said, because I think it's really a critical point. That's right, Gazprom is providing a lot of discounts. Actually, it's slow, it's resisting until the very last moment. It's giving this discount after long and painful negotiations. It doesn't run ahead saying, okay guys, you want discount, please take it. No, it is a hard negotiator, really. But what would you expect from a commercial company oriented on profit maximization? Gazprom is a very specific case because profit maximization is something which government demands from it. So it actually doesn't have any choice. They have to report to the president, here are our gas export revenues. And so it's their CPI, if you wish. Yeah? And therefore, of course, they are trying to protect this profit as much as possible. And, you know, there was investigation by the European Commission, I think in 2005, 2006, Gazprom had destination clauses in the contracts which were prohibiting resale of this gas. Yeah? And then there was this investigation, and then European Commission started negotiations, and after maybe 1 or 2 years, it was also not very fast process, but Gazprom has removed these destination clauses from the contracts. So actually, when there was a legitimate framework put on the Gazprom's contracts, it immediately decided to comply with it. So if there is now investigation against Gazprom, the next one, concerning oil price indexation, this different
It has been completed in May, but report has not been released.
So we don't know, exactly. We don't know the results of this investigation, but if there are any legitimate reasons to discuss price levels in the different countries, especially in those which are strongly dependent on Russia, then there is a ground for negotiations. And usually, I mean, Gazprom is showing always that it prefers to go in line. It is trying to avoid all arbitration courts. If you look at the last 5 years, so it can be solved in a normal, civilized way. But telling that it is charging too much simply because it can do it, and that it should be more, responsible and charge lower price, you would never expect it from a commercial company, especially from the one like Gazprom.
Okay, so then what's the issue with reverse gas flows to Ukraine?
Actually, that's a special story, and it's a part of solution which Ukraine is trying to find for itself. So far, these are quite small volumes and quite unstable, I would say. They started in 2013, then they dropped, then they started to rise again. It's a separate story. It doesn't have... Ukrainian contract signed by Gazprom, it was not made in the framework of the European legislation. The contract signed in 2010, it was a very, very special animal. I think it's just the problem of Gazprom-Naftogaz relationship. So it's not European regulation. So
okay, may I add to that?
Yes.
Well, I don't see any problem with physical reverse flow from Europe to Ukraine, because as I said, Ukraine is part of Europe now. So basically, from the gas balance point of view, what this will mean is that Europe will have to either find alternative gas to supply Ukraine, or it will have to flow back Russian gas, which would be flying via Ukrainian territory. And I mean, it doesn't sound like gas will become cheaper if it first goes to Europe and then comes back. So for Ukraine, why it would prefer sort of to buy gas in Europe remains unclear to me. But basically, again, either legally or technically, there should not be a problem. Ukraine and neighboring countries work on increasing this reverse physical capacity. So if Ukraine wants to buy gas in Europe, no problem. Actually, this means that Europe will have either to import more LNG or buy more Russian gas, given that North African gas goes down.
Okay. You know, unfortunately, we are out of time, but we can network and ask questions of the panelists after this panel is over, because we have to vacate the room at 5, I'm told.
Yes, so thank you to all our panelists for your insights. I'd just like to call Kostab up to close the GES. He's the co-president. So Kostab, I think he's outside. he just stepped out right this moment.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean we can have another question.
So I think some of the questions that we wanted to discuss were the South Stream and whether that's a credible alternative for diversification of supply.
South Stream or Southern Corridor?
South Stream in particular.
These are absolutely
Southern Corridor, but South Stream is the element where, is it Bulgaria is blocking it?
South Stream, it's not about diversifying supply sources, definitely. It's just about bypassing Ukraine. Because as I said, there was no acceptable solution found in all these interactions between on transit issue. So the decision was chosen, which is most expensive from the economic point of view, but is the only one which guarantees a reliable supplies. So not the best option, but...
So should the EU allow South Stream?
If I were EU, I would allow it. If someone is ready to spend like 30 or 40 billion euros to build pipeline in order to guarantee security of supply of gas for me, I would be happy. It's their headache, it's their financial risk. Why not?
And is Gazprom still prepared to do it?
Yeah, it is.
Gazprom is building that. And if I may, yesterday I attended an energy security sort of workshop on Central Asia, and the former energy minister, the British former energy minister spoke there, and he explicitly said that he would support building South
Stream.
South Stream.
Okay. We leave it there, and then we carry on during the networking drinks. I would like to thank all the panelists. And I'd like to thank the audience as well, and we'll continue after this. Over to you, Gustav.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. So ladies and gentlemen, we have finally now come to the close of the 11th Annual Global Energy Summit. It was a great pleasure for us welcoming you all to the Energy Summit at London Business School, and we hope you had a great time. I would like to thank all our speakers who took time out of their busy schedules and came here to make this conference possible. I would like to thank our platinum sponsor, the Boston Consulting Group, our silver sponsors, FMC Technologies and Statoil, our luncheon sponsor, Schlumberger Business Consulting, whose patronage made it possible for us to execute this summit. I would like to thank our media partners, Bloomberg New Energy Finance, British Institute of Energy Economics, and Interfax Global Energy for promoting the conference through their channels. I would also like to extend a special thanks to Eden EV for arranging the Tesla promotion in such short notice. From the outset, we really wanted to build the biggest global energy summit ever, and I'm really quite proud about it. And the credit for this goes to our exceptional team, who made it possible through their hard work and dedication running up to this event. Our speakers team of Thiago Costas, Bilal Raza, Jonathan Thompson, and Paul Harvey-Flock reached out to our speakers and helped form the panels. Our awesome marketing duo of Amrita Kundu and Namrata Singh made the entire marketing and media outreach possible. Our sponsorship team of Efrat Shari Grebel, Prem Sohal, and Lucy Codington ensured we were sufficiently funded to execute this event. Our treasurer, Laurent, he is our money manager who keeps our costs under check. Thank you for being there. And last but not the least, a special round of applause for our logistic heroes. Rich Hughes, James Covey, Barack Zimmerman, and Jimmy Song. They all ensured that the entire conference infrastructure ran according to schedule and the venue was perfect. Seriously, I could not have asked for a better team to run this conference, and all their combined effort made the event today possible. I would also like to extend a special thanks to all our volunteers who really took time out of the busy schedules as well with the classes going on and made sure that everything runs according to plan. And finally, I must thank my co-chairman and my friend Lucas Diomas, who is giving a similar speech downstairs right now. And, and I possibly could not have asked for a better co-chair to run this conference as well. A special note of thanks to our London Business School alumni advisor, Raju Patel, as well, for helping us in more ways than one and giving us his support and valuable insights during the entire conference planning and execution. I would like to now close the 11th Global Energy Summit. I hope you all enjoyed it. We will now break for the evening networking drinks at the atrium, generously sponsored by the Boston Consulting Group. Thank you very much for coming. It was really our pleasure to host you all today, and hope to see you again coming next year. Thank you very much.